Where's your spot? Where are you going to get set up?
Yeah, in a not disruptive place.
Beautiful. Mark Pugliese says, in honor of what I hope will be the one big moment to save us. Thank you, Mark. Well, I don't mean to damper expectations, but, never expect one thing to be the only thing. This is a small group. We hope it grows, but it is a coalition group among other groups. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot, and this is a place to start and a building block. But that is the idea. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that very much. Black Spock, thanks for the $2 super sticker. Appreciate that. I got to text Colin because status quo streaming hasn't started yet. All right, let's go over here.
Once the speeches start, there's really no point. I'll shut it down once the speeches are gone.
All right. Yair Navarrete, thank you for the $9.99 super sticker. Appreciate that very much. Thank you for your support, everybody. That's easy for me since I've totally never sworn. Yes, thanks, Fun Bad. Appreciate that very much, Fun Bad. All right, now status quo's going, getting a big crowd everywhere we got. That's good. Let's go WSB. Just joined on Thursday. Beautiful. Thanks, Paul Green. Appreciate that very much. Derek P., thanks for the super sticker. Landrew for $100. Thank you,
ding,
Landrew.
Ding, 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 ding.
I'm going to hit that cowbell for you, the automated cowbell. Where is that automated cowbell? There it is. Landrew says, I once had a debate with Chris Hedges about the need for a leader. I said, we need a leader like Bernie who brought us all together. Chris says, leaders inevitably fail you. 1 month later, Bernie betrayed us all. Who will be our leader? Did you jinx the Bernie campaign, Landrew? Well, I don't think there's going to be one leader. And like I said, this is one group that will work. It will have to work in coalition with other groups. They have Amazon workers there today. They have Teamsters there today. They have Omali Yeshitela submitting a speech today from Uhuru. That's a good partner group. And they have, obviously, some of their own people, some of Kshama's own people from the Tax Amazon fight. They have people from the University of Missouri campaign for $25 an hour minimum wage speaking. And then they have people from their caste discrimination fight later as well. So they have a lot going on here today.
Keaton does it.
So you don't have like a staff to help?
Not yet. Not yet.
All right. We got somebody recognizes there. What do we get, an employment application there?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Are there people on the stage there now? We're at 40 seconds until their stream starts. So we will get that screen share set up.
The Green Party, and we're just so incredibly excited here to be joined by impressive organizers who help.
All right, Russ. So I'm going to mute you so that I can go to their stream. Okay.
Of the Green Party, and we're just so incredibly excited here to be joined by impressive organizers who have helped build for this event, including the Green Party, Chris Hedges, Carolina Amazonians United for Solidarity and Empowerment, also known as Cause, Due Dissidence, Revolutionary Blackout Network, Status Quo, union members from SEIU, IBU, UAW, and more. And of course, many who are not yet part of an organization, but arrived ready to organize and win. I know we have people in the room today from as far away as Massachusetts and North Carolina. Can people raise their hands if they traveled to come here today? That's impressive. In addition to this room full of people ready to organize and win, we're live streaming this event to thousands of people on several channels across YouTube. This helps us, all of us here, get a head start on what we have to do immediately after this, right? Because this event is just kind of the kickoff for us to go out and continue to build and organize. Speaking to thousands of people on YouTube and other social media channels helps us get a head start on spreading the word that it will be urgently necessary once we leave here today. I'm going to periodically give some reports from the live stream. So if you're watching there, please let us know in the comments where you're from so we can share, the spread of who we're talking to. Like many working class people, just a little bit about me, I've been fighting for my life against rising rents, unattainable health care, climate catastrophe, and I've watched as the Democrats have either feigned helplessness or led the charge on every attack on working people. I'm horrified by the attacks that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and their reactionary administration are carrying out on federal workers, on immigrants, on LGBTQ people, not only because I stand in solidarity with oppressed people everywhere, but because history tells us that attacks on vulnerable communities are only a prelude to an assault on the working class as a whole. And if you're here today, I imagine it's because those things resonate with you too. To an extent, we're almost exhausted from hearing all the things that are wrong, right? We know the symptoms. We see the ever-broadening human misery in our everyday lives. A recent statistic that just really hit me was that homelessness amongst adults over 65 is on track to triple by 2030. And we have very clear studies showing that it's the cost of housing and healthcare that's driving this trend. It's unambiguous. Today, that there are 10 times as many so-called natural disasters every year, and we have unambiguous data saying it's climate change fueling that escalation. And of course, I think something that brought many of us into the struggle over the last year is the ongoing horrific atrocities in Gaza that continue to persist despite a ceasefire. Trump is kind of the most honest about the genocidal ambitions to completely remove all Palestinians from Palestine, and this project moves forward despite the overwhelming support for peace. The real question, though, that millions of working class people have, and I think why we're here today, is what will it take to turn the tide? I started by saying that I'm here because I know that we can win, and I feel confident in that fact because I've seen it. I was excited to help found Workers Strike Back in 2023, to build on the strategy that has yielded so many incredible victories, like the Seattle minimum wage that was $15 when we won it and is now over $20 an hour. That was like the Amazon tax, where we taxed Amazon and big business over $250 million per year to fund affordable housing. These are the kinds of transformative victories that are urgently necessary to turn the tide. During those fights, I saw how in a city with no elected Republicans, Democrats played an open role of subservience to big business, obstructing our movements. And when we did force their hands so that they had to vote yes on what we were fighting for, they fought to water down our victories at every single opportunity. The Democratic Party is not an ally to left-wing movements. When Kshama Sawant left office, those same Democrats rapidly moved to water down our $15 an hour minimum wage law last year. They wanted to use inflation as a reason to permanently enshrine a second lower tier among minimum wage workers, as though it's workers and not the bosses who should absorb those costs. It was absolutely shocking. And Workers Strike Back and Revolutionary Workers led the charge in stopping that attack, turning out to City Hall and stopping it in its tracks. As of January this year, every single Seattle minimum wage worker makes $20.76 an hour. And that's what we're all here today to discuss. How can we continue to build on that fighting strategy that engages the strength of working class and young people? Because we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized, and refuses to make backroom deals with the two parties of the billionaires. How can we fight the rich and their two parties and win?
This woman's name is Emily. I'm not sure her last name.
For many of us, we maybe feel like we've been checked into the struggle. We've, been out protesting, and it feels sometimes like it's not moving the needle. I think for Workers Strike Back, a core piece of our strategy is clear fighting demands that act as a call to action for working people. And that's why we're bringing, as part of our Fight the Rich campaign, demands like Medicare for All and unionize Amazon front and center today. And we're going to talk more about this Fight the Rich campaign throughout the day. But we know that unionizing Amazon and winning Medicare for All would be transformative for working people. But also, importantly, we know that they're wildly popular. We saw how in Missouri, even though Trump won the popular vote, a $15 an hour minimum wage also passed overwhelmingly, so that these kind of working class victories can cut across the noise of the two parties of big business that seeks to divide us. From people who are totally turned off by electoral politics to those who are organized and fought for the strongest vote for Jill Stein in the last election, many in this room today, and even those who were lured into voting for Trump on the promise that things might actually change for the better, demands like Medicare for All can act as a lightning rod, uniting working class people against our real political enemies, the rich. The full proposed program of demands for Fighting the Rich campaign, and like I said, more speakers are going to get into more detail, but I think it's important for us to start here, is Medicare for All, end the genocide in Gaza, tax Amazon and big business to fund social housing, stop mass deportations, and take big corporations into democratic public ownership. So Workers Strike Back wants to use this organizing conference, and we're working with a broad array of other groups to bring this event together to build an organized fighting force prepared to agree not only on that program, but a strategy to win it. And we're so excited to have you here today. I'd like to welcome up my co-MC, Margaret, who's going to give you some opening remarks as well. And then we're going
Oh, what happened there? Come on. Did we freeze?
I'd like to welcome up my co-MC, Margaret, who's going to give you some opening remarks as well. And then we're going to
What happened? They have stream problems. Hey, Russell, are you there?
get into it.
Oh, there we go. Okay, good. All right. Whew. That would have been bad. Oh, they're having some stream issues. Let's see. All right, I have to call
Quick
Russell.
shout out to everyone who is attending today via live stream. Thank you for watching and thank you for tuning in. Your participation matters a great deal. I'd also like to share that I'm very excited to be here today with everyone who has organized this conference, specifically Workers Strike Back. During the 2024 presidential election, Workers Strike Back and the Jill Stein Butchware campaign closely worked together to advance workers' rights and a strong, consistent anti-war message. Maybe you attended the rally in Seattle. Perhaps you were one of the tens of thousands who watched them via live stream. Of course, you may have also seen the viral video of Kshama's speech from the Dearborn rally, which captivated millions of viewers. This conference and the Fight the Rich campaign are important extensions of that collaborative effort. We're here today because we share common perspectives on electoral reform, police reform, social justice, the ecological crisis, and perhaps most urgently, an end to the genocide and peace for Palestine. The situation in Palestine right now, which I think we need to understand, for capitalists is not primarily a moral one. That's how we think of it, but that's not how capital thinks of it. For them, this is a matter of suppressing and crushing liberation movements. A liberated Palestine means a liberated Middle East. Liberation in the Middle East means capitalism in the imperial core faces a serious crisis, and they will not let that happen. So they are unleashing the full violence of their extraordinary power to make sure it doesn't. We need to be cognizant of the fact that liberation in Palestine is fundamentally antithetical to the capitalist world economy. Any liberation struggle by a country on the periphery to achieve economic independence, to use their own resources for their own development, for their own ecological transition, or for their own human needs is destabilizing for capital in the core. And capital reacts with the most extraordinary violent backlashes, as we've seen time and time again. Now it's Palestine and Syria. Before it was Libya, before it was Iraq, before it was Chile, before that it was Indonesia, before that it was the Congo, and it will never stop. Countries of the imperial core are overwhelmingly responsible, specifically the ruling classes who control the means of production and energy manufacturing for excess emissions which are driving the climate crisis. And the ecological crisis represents the processes of colonization and appropriation, and it's also a disaster which is playing out along colonial lines. If we're not attentive to those colonial dimensions, we're fundamentally missing the point. We live in an age of incredible paradox, with tremendous production, labor, and manufacturing, yet 80% of the world's population cannot meet their basic needs. The explanation for this paradox, And the problems of social and ecological change we face are ultimately a symptom of our system of production, capitalism. This is a crisis which at its root is about capitalism and can only be overcome by recognizing that fact. And the antidote to capitalism is ecological socialism. We should have collective democratic control over what we are producing.
Look at that. They call a rumble rant from in the room.
We should have democratic control over what we are producing. We should control what the goals of our production are and who benefits from them and so on. When we do, we can solve these problems quickly. We actually know what to do. We just don't have the power to do it. So I think in the face of these ongoing crises, we have to have clarity about what it is we want to achieve, and we need to start building movements and coalitions which are capable of achieving our shared goals, which is one of the reasons I'm happy to be here with Workers Strike Back, the Fight the Rich campaign, and groups like Whole Washington and Fair Vote Washington. If you don't know, Whole Washington advocates for single-payer universal health care, and they are a countrywide organization, so you can find them in your state if you are not here in Washington. And Fair Vote is also a nationwide organization, and they work for electoral reform, single transferable vote, ranked choice voting. That is the way we solve that situation. And working together with all of you and with all of those organizations, we can change our world for the better. It doesn't have to be this way.
Thank you so much, Margaret, and to the Green Party for being here. So just before we dive into the main speakers, there's a lot of logistics going on for an all-day conference, and so I'd like to invite Shirley Henderson, who's the captain of the steward team, who will be a really great resource if you end up having any questions today. So come on up, Shirley, and just going to give you just a quick rundown of some logistics before we dive in, just to make sure people feel confident about where they need to be.
All right, so I just muted that for a second since we don't necessarily need to hear the logistics of the room. Just want to announce, as our crowd file is in, we are taking Rumble Rants and Super Chats today. We are streaming this to some friends of ours channel, and so in order to not get them in trouble with YouTube censorship, please keep the Super Chats and Rumble Rants relatively clean for today, sort of PG-13 and milder, and then you can lash out like you always do on our regular stream tomorrow. Thank you for that. That's our logistics presentation. That's my outline of logistics for the stream.
Who are in person, we definitely want everybody to have a badge. This is for many reasons, but it also helps us keep tabs on people, who's already registered, who hasn't, so we can keep track of who's here today. It's best if you get a lanyard, so if you've just got the...
Okay. We don't need to hear about the lanyards. All right, we'll take some more super chats, some Rumble Rants here. Hey, Freebie for life. Keep speaking truth to power. Thank you. Hey, this is an opportune time to give you a virtual cowbell. Where are those cowbells at? Where's the virtual cowbell? There it is. Keep speaking truth to power. Your work is so important. Thank you for your consistency and courage. Thank you, Freebie for life. Appreciate that very much. And thanks to everyone who contributed to our Give, Send, Go, to our fundraiser to get Russell out there. And thank you for the support today. The Super Chats and Rumble Rants are always super helpful. V. Nettlesboom, nothing to say, but here's $5 your way. Thanks for what you do, says Nick T2234. Thank you, Nick. Appreciate that very much. All right. Looks like we'll go back here to the logistics. Hopefully this is almost over.
For whatever reason, we're going to have QR codes to access the agenda digitally at tables that are going to be up throughout the event. So yeah, come look for us if you have any issues or concerns. We're here to help you.
Thank you so much, Shirley.
That was a good time.
Are y'all ready to get into it? All right. So we're starting off with a bang. Our first speaker, it's my honor to introduce former Seattle City Council member and socialist Kshama Sawant is a founding member of Worker Strike Back and also a member of Revolutionary Workers. She led the fight for the $15 an hour minimum wage that is now over $20 an hour here in Seattle. She has never backed down or taken a backroom deal in her 10 years in office. She only accepted the average wage of a worker that she represented, donating the rest to social movements. And unfortunately, that is an incredibly rare track record. It's the only one I know of. And so it's my honor, to introduce someone who used their elected position to organize working class struggle. And she's going to talk to us about how to fight the rich and what we're here to do today.
Good morning, everyone, both people who are here in person and watching over live stream. The billionaires and their system are in crisis. Political parties around the world, parties that represent the elite, are facing revolt after revolt from working people. Last year in the elections of all 10 leading industrialized nations, the incumbents were either booted out or lost a big share of the vote. This was the first time this has ever happened in almost 120 years of records. Here in the US, the approval rating of the former incumbent Democratic Party is currently in the rubbish heap. Nearly half of registered Democratic Party voters disapprove of them. And overall, only 21% approve of how Democrats in Congress are handling themselves in the present crisis. The revolt of working people against the establishment is fundamentally about the bankruptcy of capitalism and its representatives. The cost of living crisis, the skyrocketing rents, the undermining of the public services working people rely on, the death of the American dream. Working people are fed up with going broke just to buy groceries or pay their rent. Meanwhile, wealth continues to be rapidly amassed at the top. Amidst our desperate struggle for survival, last year saw the world's 5 richest billionaires increase their wealth by $542 billion. Elon Musk, Trump's current favorite billionaire, has $500 billion in wealth. This revolt against the Democratic Party does not mean working people are giving Trump permission to run roughshod over them either. It is true that a section of the working class has illusions that Trump is their guy, and this raises a crucial strategy question for us. How do we win those working people over to a fight back? Because we have seen that on issue after issue, whether it is raising the minimum wage or taxing the rich or Medicare for all or ending the genocide in Gaza, American working people are more progressive than ever before. Some of the states that voted for Trump last year also passed ballot initiatives for a $15 minimum wage, paid sick leave, union support, and abortion rights. And a recent poll confirms that there is not majority support for the bulk of Trump's anti-worker agenda and the pet projects of the Republican Party. A majority opposed Trump's brutal attacks on federal employees. A majority of Americans are vehemently opposed to Trump's plan to permanently extend his 2017 tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts that Biden continued. Large majorities oppose eliminating the repayment plan that helps student loan borrowers and funding cuts for federal student loans and grants. Over 80% oppose cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, commonly known as food stamps, and a whopping 90% of Americans are against cuts to Medicare and Medicaid. Trump's own approval ratings, while higher in the past, are basically breaking even. About an equal number approve and disapprove. And this is during his so-called honeymoon period. These approval ratings have nowhere to go but down. But we should not expect that it will happen overnight. We should not be complacent. And in the meantime, Trump and the billionaires are going for broke. They want to do maximum damage at this moment before a serious opposition to their assault develops and before the real impacts of the damage they're doing becomes clear. The main success of this billionaire in the White House has been tapping into the widespread anger at the establishment, and in this, he's been handed a humongous gift by the rotten Democratic Party and its endless betrayals of working people, which allowed him to get re-elected after he left office as the most unpopular president in modern American history. The huge irony is that Trump is the one capitalizing on working class anger, and the anger that is actually at billionaires and the rich, and the very same class that Trump himself belongs to and represents. Politicians and the corporate media were stunned by the show of support on social media for Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson last year. They were even more shocked when polling showed that this was not some fringe phenomenon, but a strong majority sentiment, nearly 70%. This anger represents a historic opening to fight for fundamental change if it can be redirected into a working class movement. Killing individual CEOs is no solution. Thompson has already been replaced with another blood-sucking executive. And if such killings were to continue, they would be used as a pretext to attack workers and increase the powers of the police. Instead, we need to build powerful mass movements of the millions against the billionaires. And it's only through working class power that we can win a different kind of society. Our goal must be to both fight for radical change in the present and to bring down the billionaires and their system, capitalism. Unfortunately, alongside the fury of working people, the most prominent feature of this political moment is the near total vacuum of clear leadership on the left and in the labor movement. There is a profound shortage of leaders prepared to break with the political parties of the rich. We've seen betrayals one after another of these so-called progressives. Bernie Sanders, AOC and the Squad, and progressive labor leaders like Sean Fain. Both Bernie and AOC played a central role in bringing Trump to power. They uncritically supported Biden and then rushed to endorse Harris. They abandoned Medicare for all. They abandoned the fight for a $15 minimum wage. They could have organized mass rallies on either of those demands and put massive pressure on both parties and built a new party in the process. Instead, they put a premium on their peaceful relations with the elite, squandered a historic opportunity, and carried out a historic betrayal. There is a meme going around of Bernie Sanders' action figure that has a stamp on it saying sold out. I'm not sure if there's one for AOC. In any case, that meme is the epitaph of the Bernie movement. Sadly, it was a predictable ending. I, like many of you, was part of Sanders' movement, and we were correct to be because millions were coming together, but some of us did so with our eyes open. From the beginning, myself and the socialists who are part of revolutionary workers today noted the fundamental mistake of funneling people into the Democratic Party. We warned about the dead-end nature of this strategy of a political revolution against the billionaire class from inside a party that is owned lock, stock, and barrel by that same billionaire class. The most recent stunt by Bernie Sanders, this so-called tour against the oligarchs, is also telling. Even at this moment, Sanders is trying to redirect people back towards the Democratic Party. One of his 3 central planks is reform the party. Reform the party? Seriously? This party that has stabbed us all in the back 1,000 times over? I don't think so. Our job is to burn the Democratic Party to the ground.
Well said.
To destroy
Good point,
any
Charles.
remaining illusions in it, in any idea that it represents workers or oppressed people. We need a new mass party for the working class and the oppressed. The organizations here, like Workers Strike Back, the Green Party, and all of us, we have an important role to play in that process. But that will not happen so long as lesser evilism rules the day and until the utterly failed strategy of voting for one billionaire party so that another billionaire party can win is abandoned. We need to build an organized, unified movement of working people to systematically take on the rich who run society and undermine their ability to rule. We have a lot of wind at our backs. There is a major opening for working class politics. But we also have real obstacles. We face the absolute disaster that the left and labor leadership have become, and along with that, all the rotten ideas that are being argued for by those misleaders. So we need to return to the basics, and we need to get something straight. First, this system does not belong to us. Capitalism is a system of rule by the rich and solely for the rich. It is based on stealing the wealth you and I create through our labor, as Karl Marx explained 175 years ago. Or, as the late George Carlin said somewhat more recently, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Second, the main reason this tiny sliver of society, the billionaires, the capitalist class, are able to own more wealth than a large majority of the world's population, more than billions, the only reason they can make us work long hours and live off crumbs while they amass untold wealth is by dividing working people, the overwhelming majority of society. To overcome that, we need to be clear about some things. By far, the most important division in society is between the capitalists and the rest of us. Between them, the rich, and the immense majority of us who struggle to survive. To succeed, we need to be clear about who our friends are and who our enemies are. Our enemies are the billionaires and the bosses, the capitalist class, their institutions, their political parties, and also their more treacherous spokespeople who sometimes appear and sound like they support workers, but really act as pressure release valves and gatekeepers. Our enemies are not other working class or middle class or poor people. They are not immigrants or tech workers or workers in the South. Or Muslims, or trans people, or ordinary Republican or Democratic voters, or independent voters, or non-voters. Our enemies are those who make billions, or even millions of dollars a year, own the politicians, own the land and the resources, and who call the shots in the system. Our enemies are also those who justify and protect the interests of the rich. And because we outnumber them 1,000,000 times over, they need to invent 1,000,000 ways to divide us. They use nationalism and xenophobia. They tell us that workers in other countries, whether China or Russia or immigrants from Mexico, they tell us they are our enemy. This is one of Trump and the Republican Party's favorites. They use identity politics, which is favored by the Democratic Party. Identity politics is a systematic weapon used by the ruling class to stoke division between white workers and non-white workers, between workers based on gender, sexual orientation, and nationality, between workers with college education and millions of other workers whom Hillary Clinton insultingly called the basket of deplorables and Biden more recently called garbage. We need to be clear about the difference between identity politics and the fight against oppression. Identity politics is corrosive to working class solidarity. But it is the responsibility of all of us in the working class to fight together against all oppression. Against racism, sexism, transphobia, Islamophobia, xenophobia, and every other kind of prejudice. Because if we don't, we are just playing into the boss's ploy to divide us and use that division to keep us all at low wages with poor standards of living and afraid to fight while they rake it in. Some of the most important victories we won through my Socialist City Council office were on issues of oppression, and those victories helped to build for other victories. The Amazon tax itself would not have been won had we not won the support of the rank and file of the Black Lives Matter movement during the George Floyd rebellion in 2020 to defeat Jeff Bezos to win hundreds of millions every year in big business taxes to fund affordable social housing. Our Amazon tax raised $450 million last year alone. The favored tools of the Republicans at present are anti-immigrant and anti-LGBTQ, particularly anti-trans scapegoating. And of course, they try to blame the poor for the poverty. You know, Elon Musk famously or infamously just said the poor people are parasites. Both wings of the ruling class, he is the parasite, exactly. He and Bezos and Zuckerberg and all the rest of them. Both wings of the ruling class try to divide us on party lines also to make Democratic voters hate Republican voters and vice versa. The Democratic Party, who use identity politics for their own end, don't actually care about oppressed people. Actually, they stab them in the back the moment they can't leverage them for their own gains. When the Black Lives Matter movement was on the streets in the millions, the Democrats assured us all they were in favor of funding community programs and agreed the police budgets were bloated. They said Black Lives Matter, sometimes with tears in their eyes at press conferences. Then they broke virtually every promise they made with the help of black misleaders who just wanted money for their NGOs and a career ladder to climb. Sellouts come in every color. The Democrats claim to be all about immigrant rights. They attacked Trump for being anti-immigrant, and then Harris ran on the message that she'd be the best builder of the border wall. Many working people are concerned about immigration. This is unfortunately an issue on which Trump currently has support. There is genuine confusion. At the root of the support for deportations is the fact that millions of people have watched the American dream get kicked into the gutter. Millions are stuck in soulless, dead-end jobs that don't pay enough to make rent. They're saddled with student debt, medical debt, credit card debt. They face collapsing school districts for their children, gutting of social services. They're called deplorable, lazy, garbage. They face a society plundered by the billionaires, and they are justifiably angry. Trump and the right wing channel this anger by the scapegoating of immigrants. And we cannot fall for it. The boss's super exploitation and marginalization of immigrants is used to undermine the wages and conditions of all workers, both native-born and immigrant. Low wages for immigrants are used to drive down everyone else's wages. Immigrants worried about being deported are put in a position where it's more difficult for them to make demands for workplace safety, and they get more desperate and accept worse conditions. The net effects are all bad for native-born workers and the working class as a whole, because when the bosses can force immigrant workers to accept worse conditions, that means worse conditions for American-born workers also.
That's a good point. That's a good angle.
Latin American immigrants don't leave their communities and often their families behind to risk everything, sometimes losing their very lives trying to get over the border for no reason. It is because of the devastating effects of US imperialism in their own countries, as well as the climate crisis. More and more deportations and firepower at the border will not end immigrant influx into the United States, and it's not going to solve the problems of American-born workers. The purpose of the anti-immigrant rhetoric is for you to turn your anger away from the billionaires and their sociopathic system of capitalism. If Trump carried out the kind of mass deportations he has talked about, it would have a hugely damaging impact on the economy and millions of native-born workers, as well as immigrants that are deported. It would almost shut down food productions and lead to a massive escalation of prices. Native-born and immigrant workers must stand together against the waves of deportation being carried out by both parties of the billionaires and fight for better wages and conditions for all of us. And incidentally, if Democrats wanted to fight Trump or defend immigrants, they would have immediately removed the totally corrupt and politically bankrupt New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who, in exchange for a corrupt pardon, is helping Trump and ICE carry out deportations. We can't stand for any of this. We have to maintain our focus on the rich. So I ask you, who is our enemy? Who is our enemy? The rich. That's right. It's the rich, the billionaires, and don't let them tell you any differently. We need to build unity on a broad basis with all those who want to fight with us against the rich. That part is important. We need unity with those who want to fight against the rich. Unity with those who want to fight is the basis on which we need to build. That is what we have done here in Seattle. That is how we won the highest major city minimum wage in the country, and how we've defeated Amazon again and again. There are millions. There are millions who do want to fight back, and that's whom we are trying to reach, not those who admire the billionaires. What are we fighting for? I hope everyone has had a chance to read Worker Strike Back's program and the Fight the Rich campaign proposal we've circulated here today. These are the main demands we are proposing at our Worker Strike Back convention tomorrow, which we'll be discussing, amending, and voting on. Fight the rich and the billionaire class and their system. Workers need a real raise, $25 an hour minimum wage. Good union jobs for all. Stop the climate catastrophe. Take big energy corporations into workers' ownership. Fight racism, sexism, and all oppression. Stop mass deportations. Medicare for all and quality affordable housing, tax the rich, end the genocidal war on Gaza, no military aid, no occupation, bring down Trump, the billionaires, and their two parties, no more sellouts, we need a new party. We need to build our campaigns around things we agree on and that we can use to mobilize many thousands of people to fight for, because they could make a real difference in their lives. Both Medicare for all and $25 an hour minimum wage and many of these other demands can inspire people to fight. And we must also keep our focus on ending the genocidal war on Gaza and the brutal occupation. It seems unlikely the current ceasefire will make it to the second phase, and already Israel has breached it multiple times. This is one of the worst genocides of our generation, and we must find every path to stop it. We need to build an international anti-war movement alongside an international workers' movement. We must refuse to support the boss's wars. And I mean both the war on Gaza and the bloody anti-imperialist war in Ukraine. Exactly. These conflicts are a product of the global capitalist crisis. We are entering into a new era of war, which comes out of the winding down of the era of neoliberal globalization, which was rooted in a world in which US imperialism was the undisputed power. That world is gone, replaced by the US-China global conflict, and with it, economic nationalism and proxy wars. The billionaires in different countries are increasingly locked in violent competition between each other, violence against, that we face. Imperialist war, including the horrific meat grinder taking place in Ukraine right now, is not in the interests of the working class, and we must reject it. The rich want us to offer up our corpses for the purpose of their fight over profits and resources. Neither Western imperialism nor Russian imperialism cares one bit for Ukrainian workers or Russian workers. Neither does Zelensky. And not one more worker should be dying for Putin or Zelensky. As our friend said just now, the only war for us is class war. And we must support Ukrainian and Russian workers in their fight against their own capitalist classes in bringing down both Putin and Zelensky. That is a fight we should fully take on board. We should have no illusions in Trump's ideas of plundering the natural resources in Ukraine. Trump is no friend of working people in either Russia or Ukraine, and he is no anti-war president. The driving force in Trump's policy on the Ukraine-Russia war is the decisive anti-war message working people sent to the incumbent warmongering party of the ruling class, the Democratic Party, last year. And Trump realizes he needs to reckon with that pressure from the working class, including from his MAGA working class base, who are angry that tens of billions of dollars are being spent on wars and their needs go unfunded. It is all this that has prompted Trump to begin pushing talks for an end to the deeply unpopular war in Ukraine and to declare a temporary ceasefire in Gaza, which he predictably followed up by repeatedly and grotesquely calling for ethnic cleansing in Gaza. When we were campaigning for Jill Stein last year, we said Trump will double down on the war in Gaza. By the way, how shameful is it that Bernie Sanders is railing against the attempts to end the Ukraine war and end to a war that has ravaged Ukraine and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian and Russian people? This is what Bernie wants to rail against after he failed to stand up against a genocidal onslaught on Gaza, and now, instead of building a movement against federal employee firings and attacks on working people? So the question for us is, how do we build our movement? How do we fight back? I'll take an example from my first election campaign. We didn't invent the idea of $15 an hour, but it was our movement's victory in Seattle that turned in 2013 and 2014. It turned $15 an hour from a slogan into a national movement and into a series of concrete victories in other cities. Not everyone agreed with 15 when we started. To say the least, when we began organizing around it. It was a radical idea at the time, and many dismissed it as utopian. But my fellow socialists and I had the sense that it will inspire workers to fight, and it did, and our movement made history. Campaigning for 15 in my working class election campaign in 2013 was crucial, but it was just the beginning. It took an all-out fight. We immediately used the momentum from our election victory to launch a movement called 15 Now. We held mass organizing meetings, rallies, marches, built neighborhood action groups, and filed a ballot initiative to present a credible threat to big business and the Democrats. If they did not pass a strong 15 in City Hall, we would take it to the ballot box. That is how we won. We won despite all the attempts of the Democrats to block or water down the $15 minimum wage. And we won despite the attempts of some labor leaders behind the scenes trying to convince others in the movement that all we can win is $11 an hour, we should just dump 15. We need to similarly go on the offensive today. And the logistics industry, and specifically Amazon, is crucial. This industry underpins the billionaire's profit-making machine. Unionizing Amazon is therefore a strategically necessary task of the working class. A victory at Amazon would shift the balance of power between bosses and workers. It would set off a wave of strikes and unionization efforts comparable to the massive worker organizing wave of the 1930s. But defeating Amazon will be far from easy. We have seen that even when Amazon workers win union elections, the company will refuse to negotiate. Workers will need to take mass coordinated strike action at multiple key facilities and shut down profits in order to win a union and their demands. We need to unleash the full power of the labor movement and support Amazon workers' efforts with all possible resources. Rank and file union members will need to get organized together across unions along with non-union workers to demand action from existing labor leaders and to build a new fighting union leadership. Some people will ask, shouldn't we be running a lot of candidates for office? We do need to prepare the ground for a mass party of working people. But speaking as a former elected representative of working people myself, my answer to that question will be no, not right now. Not right now is not when we can run lots of candidates for office. Our movement at present is not strong enough to run significant numbers of candidates. Elections are also not the main way that change happens. People with progressive ideas get elected all the time, but without a strong movement behind them, they get absorbed into the system. They capitulate to the enormous pressures from the rich and their politicians. And it might seem ironic to you all that I'm saying this as somebody who has a decade-long track record of having used elected office in the correct way. But I say this because, tragically, that is the only example we can point out in our times of elected office being used in that way. So yes, it can be done, it needs to be done that way, but a sober assessment also is that it hasn't been done otherwise outside Seattle. We need to build a stronger movement now through other campaigns and struggles to prepare the ground to be able to run candidates independent of the two parties of the billionaires. Members of our movement who do want to run for office need to be accountable to working people from the outset. They should work with the Fight the Rich campaign on developing a strong working class political platform. They would need to run any such campaign on a clear fighting working class basis and agree to accept only the average worker's wage if elected, as I did during my entire decade in City Hall. And this is another point of confusion. And while it is the bare minimum that elected representatives should do, it is not enough for them to take pro-working class votes on legislation that is in front of them. That is not enough. They need to commit themselves, as I did, to a movement-building approach, to use their office to initiate and support campaigns on bold, far-reaching demands, and even though it will alienate and infuriate both Democratic and Republican politicians. And I'll tell you a rule of thumb is if you aren't infuriating the Democratic and Republican politicians, you're doing something deeply wrong. They will need to reject a careerist route and instead go to war against both parties and also against the gatekeepers that are around those parties, the NGO leaders, the labor leaders, and so on, to fight to win every possible gain for working people and the oppressed. They need to have the stomach to become enemy number one of the ruling class and arm themselves with mass movements as we did with our office. In addition to going on the offensive, we must also defend against the attacks by the billionaires and their two parties. And that includes the attacks by Trump, which are both a continuation and a serious escalation of the long-term bipartisan project of the US ruling class. It is austerity on steroids, deregulation on steroids, imperialism on steroids, and alongside this, it's the most dramatic concentration of executive power. Trump is pushing things as far as he can, as far as he thinks he can get away with. Trump is not carrying out tariffs for working people. They are a tax on all of us. In fact, we will pay for them through increasingly obscene prices for basic necessities. At root, it's an attempt to confuse us, to pit workers in different countries against each other, and to dishonestly justify more tax cuts for corporations and the rich. Already, 14,000 federal workers have been off. Massive austerity cuts are being carried out. Healthcare services are interrupted. Farmers are in danger of losing their farms. And we have seen Trump and Republicans' latest threats on Medicare and Medicaid.
Come on.
No one should have any expectation at all that Democrats will fight against Trump. Democrats have themselves brought up again and again their willingness to attack Social Security and Medicare, including Obama and his so-called grand bargain. The Democrats paid the way for all this. Our movement was completely correct to reject Harris and the Democrats in the election and to take an independent, anti-war, pro-worker and to refuse to bend to the lesser evil pressures. And it's extremely important that Jill and the Green Party ran on a clear anti-war, pro-worker program and stood up against all the attacks.
I think we're back.
The Democrats earned their loss. Had Harris done nothing other than taken an anti-war position on Gaza and condemned the genocide, she would very likely have won. Had she also campaigned on Medicare for all and $15 in addition, Trump wouldn't have had a chance. Trump is being assisted by the complicity of the Democratic Party. Why? Because, I mean, it's not that they don't have a spine, quote unquote, as some like to say. They do have a spine when it comes to fighting against working people. When it comes to doubling down on genocide, when it comes to breaking the railroad worker strike, they had a spine when they fought against every single thing our movements fought for in Seattle, from 15 to Amazon tax to renters' rights. They certainly don't oppose austerity. They don't oppose genocide or ethnic cleansing in Gaza. They don't oppose Trump's anti-immigrant agenda. And so they are not about to stick their necks out to defend against attacks on working people and the poor, those same working people and poor people that Democrats spent the last 4 years attacking. The main complaint of the Democrats and the wing of the billionaire class that supported Harris is that they don't like how Trump is doing things, how it is destabilizing the system, their own system, and the credibility in the eyes of working people of their system. And of course, it isn't that Democrats
Sorry,
are
they're just
simply
testing the
standing aside
backup
either.
sound source.
They are frequently joining in. The 12 senators and the dozens of House Democrats who voted for the Riley-Laken bill, which destroys the right to due process for non-citizens, including legal permanent residents, by allowing ICE to arrest and deport any non-citizen who has been charged, not convicted, charged with a crime which can be as minor as shoplifting. And how about Fetterman's support for Trump's attacks on Palestinians? Bernie approving anti-worker warmonger Marco Rubio's nomination. The list is practically endless. While being clear, though, that the Democrats are not on our side, we also need to be crystal clear about something else. We cannot in any way live in the past. We cannot de-emphasize, understate, or explain away the damage that is currently being done by Trump, Musk, and company. Trump and his cabal of billionaires are doing their level best to do more damage in a few months than the bipartisan attack of Republicans and Democrats was able to do over multiple years. But we should also not overstate, as some do, and say that this is fascism now in the White House. It's important that we not use that word lightly or inaccurately. What fascism is and isn't is a whole discussion unto itself. But the fundamental reality is that while Trump would like to rule as a dictator, that is not the objective basis for it. The overwhelming majority of working people do not support Trump's attacks on democracy. One of Trump's most unpopular political moves was January 6th, which was strongly opposed by the overwhelming majority, including most people who voted Republican. And now his blanket pardon of those guilty of violence on January 6th is itself deeply unpopular, according to the polls. This is also the reason for Trump's doublespeak in saying that free speech is back. He pretends to be pro-democracy because he has to. He is helped by comparison with the Democrats who've been carrying out a crackdown on free speech in recent years, including the brutal repression against campus anti-war protesters. The capitalists, for their part, have absolutely no love of democracy. Yet, they don't want the chaos that goes along with destroying the institution of their system, which have served them incredibly well for almost 250 years. And while they are on board with big parts of Trump's agenda, of attacking workers, of austerity, of deregulation, etc., they don't want an unchecked Trump or the kind of utter chaos that fascism brought on the ruling classes and capitalism as a whole in the first half of the 20th century. The capitalists see capitalist democracy, which is of course highly limited and is mainly democracy for the billionaires, but such as it is the best possible shell for their interests. Suffice it to say that if this was fascism, this meeting would not be taking place. Many of us here today would be in prison right now or facing far worse. But we have to be clear about what is happening, how very dangerous it is, and the urgent need to fight back. While we should not for a moment let up on the Democrats, the fact is they are no longer in power. Trump and the Republicans are, and we need to fight back powerfully against them, just as we fought Biden and his party. And it's ironic that, as I said, Elon Musk calls poor people parasitic. He makes $8 million a day from government contracts that his companies have. He's one of the biggest parasites in history. Working people make everything run in this society. We create all the wealth. Nothing works without us. Not the grocery stores, not the electrical grid, not the coffee houses, not the buses, not the Amazon warehouses, not one building in this city, not one board, not one brick was put in place by a billionaire. We need to win over people to our movement who voted for Trump, who voted for Harris, who didn't vote at all, or those who, like us, campaigned and voted for the strongest anti-war pro-worker candidate, Jill Stein. We know from history that we can unite working people through common struggle. For any of you who have been on a picket line, you know what solidarity is. For any of you who've been part of a successful social movement like Tax Amazon, you know what solidarity is. And you know that in successful movements, we can have respectful discussions about our differences and our strategies. We come together around the best strategies and we carry them out together on a principled, united basis. In order for workers to win the 8-hour day or Social Security or the end of Jim Crow segregation, we had to cut across the divisions and the bosses tried to create. Trump's firing of federal employees is the biggest attack on them since Reagan went after PATCO, the Union of Air Traffic Controllers, and fired 11,000 of them in 1981. That act had devastating effects for the labor movement that have lasted to the present day. So my question is, where is the labor leadership when Trump is firing thousands of union members? In the face of this dangerous escalation of executive power, there should be mass strike action. That would be a way to actually block Trump's assault, to bring the government offices and business of the US state to a grinding halt. To shut down corporate profits, shut down the economy. Instead, we have Auto Workers Union President Shawn Fain authoring an op-ed in which he announces he's ready to work with Trump. We have Sean O'Brien, the Teamster leader, kissing up to Trump and MAGA, throwing immigrant workers under the bus, and openly surrendering to anti-union right-to-work laws. This is an absolutely shameful capitulation. It is beyond disgraceful. And let's also note the conspicuous absence of the labor leadership in any effort to build a unionizing drive in Amazon nationally. This is an abdication. This is an abdication of responsibility of gigantic proportions because they understand, as we do, that unionizing Amazon is a backbone task to build anything right now. As I said when we launched Workers' Strike Back, we need a reckoning in the labor movement to take down the business unionist leadership and restore the militant, radical, rank-and-file organizing on which the labor movement was built. And I know many hoped Shawn Fain was different. He has proved, Shawn Fain, auto workers leader, he has proved otherwise. We have to take our movement to the unions whenever possible, wherever possible, as Workers' Strike Back has done since our launch. But only 10% of this country is unionized, unfortunately. It's because of the 50 years of capitulation. The working class is not just the unionized workers. It is not just those who work with their hands or who would be considered blue collar. It is all of us who have no choice but to work for a living. All of us, whether we have a union or not. All of us who can't sit back and live off wealth. We need to build a fighting workers movement that includes all of us together, including students, retirees, and the unemployed, all those who want to fight. But who's not wanting to fight? It's clearly the majority of labor leaders, and certainly the Democratic Party leaders are not among those who want to fight. Both of them fear the empowerment of working people and the threat it poses to their system far more than any part of Trump's attacks. It's also the same reason the Democrats extinguished both Bernie campaigns. And so they prefer complicity. And the labor movement has been completely undermined by business unionist leaders who have long been tied at the hip to the Democratic Party and don't want conflict with the bosses. Business unionism is the utterly failed strategy that workers should let labor leaders quietly negotiate contracts with the bosses rather than getting organized to wrench a strong contract from the hands of the bosses. Business unionists put their stress on the bargaining process and they fear antagonizing management by mobilizing workers, much less going on strikes. Business unionist ideas have led to a steadily worsened wages and benefits and working condition situation over the past decades. They have led to dramatic declines in number of workers, as I said, who even have a union. We need to rebuild the labor movement on the basis of class struggle strategies. From the best militant traditions of labor's past, the traditions that were central to the three strikes that led the way in 1934, all strikes, by the way, led by socialists, in Minneapolis, in Toledo, and San Francisco. You can watch You can watch a recent episode of Worker Strike Back's broadcast on the Minneapolis General Strike. Those same traditions were used to unionize the auto industry in the late 1930s. Militant union organizers, many of whom were socialists or communists, led a massive organizing drive built around a clear understanding of what they were up against and saw their struggle as a class war. They strategically targeted a series of key auto plants that produced components without which the rest of the factories in General Motors could not build cars. They shut down the supply chain and with it, most of GM. They shut down the profits. They threatened the stability of the boss's system, which is what forced them to accept the union and the workers' demands. The success of the auto industry fight, which dealt this massive blow, built the basis for the fastest wave of unionization in US history. We need to learn lessons from those workers' movements today. And we need to build Worker Strike Back into a mass force nationally, as well as other class struggle organizations. If you are not yet a member of Worker Strike Back, I hope you will join today. And if you're in person here, come to our convention tomorrow. If you're watching over live stream, please sign up as a member of Worker Strike Back, and we will be in touch. We have monthly Zoom meetings as well. We must recognize that there will be no future for humanity on the basis of gradual change or small reforms which will then be walked back at a later date. Climate crisis is an existential threat. We need to end all fossil fuel use as rapidly as possible. This has been known to science for decades, and yet here we are. To stop climate catastrophe and to stop future, more dangerous growth of the right wing, we need to stop capitalism. But we can't do that with these corporations in the hands of the billionaires because we can't control what we don't own. We need to take the big energy corporations, the big banks, all the major corporations into democratic public ownership and run them ourselves. We need to take the reins of society away from the capitalists. All of our fights right now, the small ones and the big ones, have to be towards that end. I am a member of Worker Strike Back, and I am also a member, like Emily, of Revolutionary Workers, a revolutionary socialist organization. If you, like me, agree that capitalism cannot be reformed, that it needs to be replaced by a global system of solidarity and sustainability and democracy, then you should consider joining Revolutionary Workers. Solidarity.
All right. Kshama Sawant speech 220. There are two more speeches, it looks like, before the break. I thought it was generally a very good speech. Laugh. Kshama's lost me. We need to bring down Putin. Yeah, I don't love her analysis of that issue. I don't love her analysis of January 6th. And I think the climate change talk is a bit heavy-handed. Now, I don't agree with Kshama on everything, but she's very forceful, and generally it was a very good speech.
All right. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to give you a couple of announcements. First, we've crossed over 2,500 live stream viewers. So if you are watching right now, please go ahead and share the event link. Share your live stream link.
We're at well
on your
over
network.
5,000 across all platforms.
Strike
So that's
channel.
old
You can
data.
also find it at Worker Strike
That's
Back
old
social
data.
media accounts, as well as Due Dissidence and on the Hedges show itself. We're also filling up in person. So if you are here in this room, if you would please move in, bring yourselves in, and fill in the space in the middle. We are trying to feel our power here. If you're downstairs, still come upstairs as soon as you can so you can participate in person. All right, thank you very much. Many accolades could try to describe our next speaker. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist. But most importantly, in my estimation, has been his fierce independence and honesty. For 4 decades, he's refused to silence ugly truths and recognizing that for-profit newspapers run by billionaires and even public news outlets which are independent on corporate sponsors will never be willing to expose those same corporate sponsors. Without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Hedges to the stage.
Thank you. For several decades, I and a handful of others, Sheldon Wolin, Noam Chomsky, John Burns Johnson, Cornel West, Barbara Ehrenreich, Ralph Nader, and of course Jill Stein and Kshama Sawant, warned that the expanding social inequality and capture of our democratic institutions, including the media, the Congress, organized labor, academia, and the courts by corporations and oligarchs would inevitably lead to an authoritarian and finally Christian fascist state. My books, American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, Empire of Illusion, The End of Literacy and the Triumph of Spectacle, Death of the Liberal Class, Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt, written with Joe Sacco, Wages of Rebellion, and America the Farewell Tour were a succession of impassioned pleas to take the decay seriously. But I take no joy in being correct. The rage of those abandoned by the economy, the fears and concerns of a beleaguered and insecure middle class, and the numbing isolation that comes with the loss of community will be the kindling for a dangerous mass movement, I wrote in American Fascists in 2007. If these dispossessed are not reincorporated into mainstream society, if they eventually lose all hope of finding good, stable jobs and opportunities for themselves and their children, in short, the promise of a brighter future, the specter of American fascism will beset the nation. This despair, this loss of hope, this denial of a future leads the desperate into the arms of those who promise miracles and dreams of apocalyptic glory. Donald Trump does not herald the collapse of democracy. He heralds the ripping away of the veneer that masks the rot within the ruling structures and their pretense of democracy. He is the symptom, not the disease. The loss of basic democratic norms began long before Trump. Deindustrialization, deregulation, austerity, unchecked predatory corporations, including the healthcare industry, wholesale surveillance of every American, social inequality, an electoral system defined by legalized bribery, endless and futile wars, the largest prison population in the world, and the feelings of betrayal, stagnation, and despair, combined in a toxic brew that has culminated in inchoate and justified hatred of the ruling class. And the Democrats are as guilty as the Republicans. Trump and his coterie of billionaires, generals, half-wits, Christian fascists, criminals, racists, and moral deviants play the role of the Snopes clan in some of William Faulkner's novels I wrote in America the Farewell Tour. The Snopeses filled the power vacuum of the decayed South and ruthlessly seized control from the degenerated former slaveholding aristocratic elites. Flem Snopes and his extended family, which includes a killer, a pedophile, a bigamist, an arsonist, a mentally disabled man who copulates with a cow, and a relative who sells tickets to witness the bestiality, are fictional representations of the scum now elevated to the highest level of the federal government. They embody the moral decay unleashed by unfettered capitalism. The usual reference to amorality, while accurate, is not sufficiently distinctive and by itself does not allow us to place them as they should be placed in a historical moment the critic Irving Howe wrote of the Snopeses. Perhaps the most important thing to be said is that they are what comes afterwards, the creatures that emerge from the devastation with the slime still upon their lips. Let a world collapse in the South or Russia, and there appear figures of coarse ambition, driving their way up from beneath the social bottom, men to whom moral claims are not so much absurd as incomprehensible, sons of bushwhackers or muziks drifting in from nowhere and taking over through the sheer outrageousness of their monolithic force, Howe writes. They become presidents of local banks and chairmen of party regional committees, and later, a trifle slicked up, they muscle their way into Congress or the Politburo, scavengers without inhibition. They need not believe in the crumbling official code of their society. They need only learn to mimic its sounds. The political philosopher Sheldon Wolin called our system of governance inverted totalitarianism, one that kept the old iconography, language, symbols, but had handed the internal levers of power to corporations and the rich. Now we are shifting to totalitarian's more recognizable form, one dominated by a demagogue and an ideology grounded in our homegrown Christian fascism. We live in a two-tiered legal system, one where poor people are harassed, arrested, and jailed for absurd infractions, such as selling loose cigarettes, which led to Eric Garner being choked to death by the New York City police in 2014, while crimes of appalling magnitude by the oligarchs and corporations, from oil spills to bank fraud in the hundreds of billions of dollars, which wiped out 40% of the world's wealth, are dealt with through tepid administrative controls, symbolic fines, and civil enforcement that give these wealthy perpetrators immunity from criminal prosecution. I wrote in America, the Farewell Tour. The utopian ideology of neoliberalism and global capitalism is a vast con, a mechanism to funnel wealth upwards to the billionaire class. The working poor, whose unions and rights were stripped from them and whose wages have stagnated or declined over the past 40 years, have been disempowered and impoverished. Their lives, as Barbara Ehrenreich chronicled in Nickel and Dimed, are one long, stress-ridden emergency. The middle class is evaporating. Cities that once manufactured products and offered factory jobs are boarded up wastelands. The destruction is a ruse. Corporations, the destruction of trade barriers is a ruse corporations and the billionaire class use to stash $1.42 trillion in profits in overseas banks to avoid paying taxes. The labels liberal and conservative are meaningless, evidenced by a Democratic presidential candidate who turned to Wall Street bankers to formulate her economic policies and bragged about an endorsement from Dick Cheney, a war criminal who left office with a 13% approval rating. Fascism is always the bastard child of a bankrupt liberalism. The attraction of Trump is that, although vile and buffoonish, he mocks the political charade. Trump lies like he breathes, but the lies told by the two establishment parties caused far more pain and did far more damage than the lies told by Trump. Trump is merely the apotheosis of a culture of mendacity, deception, and exploitation, for we are a culture awash in lies. It no longer matters what is true, it matters only what is correct. The correct ideology of neoliberalism is as delusional as the correct ideology of the Christian fascists. Neither are reality-based belief systems. Totalitarianism elevates the brutal and the stupid, those with no genuine political philosophy other than a lust for wealth and power. Empty, mind-numbing cliches and slogans, most of which are absurd and contradictory, replace political discourse. And this is as true for the Christian right as it is for those who preach free market economics and globalization. The illusions peddled on our screens, including the fictitious persona created for Trump on The Apprentice, have replaced reality. Politics is burlesque, as Kamala Harris's vapid, celebrity-filled, issueless campaign illustrated. It is smoke and mirrors created by an army of agents, publicists, marketing departments, promoters, pollsters, script writers, wardrobe consultants, and public announcers. Our money-drenched, heavily managed elections are little more than totalitarian plebiscites designed to give a veneer of legitimacy to oligarchic and corporate power. The political malaise is mirrored in a cultural malaise, what Soren Kierkegaard calls a sickness unto death, the numbing of the soul by nihilism. The cult of the self dominates our cultural landscape. I wrote An Empire of Illusion. This cult has within it the classic traits of psychopaths: superficial charm, grandiosity, and self-importance, a need for constant stimulation, a penchant for lying, deception, and manipulation, and the inability to feel remorse or guilt. This is, of course, the ethic promoted by corporations. It is the ethic of unfettered capitalism. It is the misguided belief that personal style and personal advancement, mistaken for individualism, are the same as democratic equality. In fact, personal style, defined by the commodities we buy or consume, has become a compensation for our loss of democratic equality. We have a right in the cult of the self to get whatever we desire. We can do anything, even belittle and destroy those around us, including our friends, to make money, to be happy, to become famous. Once fame and wealth are achieved, they become their own justification, their own morality. How one gets there is irrelevant. Once you get there, those questions are no longer asked. My book, Empire of Illusion, begins in Madison Square Garden at a World Wrestling Entertainment Tour. I understood that professional wrestling was the template for our social and political life, but I did not know that it would produce a president, and soon a secretary of education, who has vowed to shut the department down. The bouts are stylized rituals I wrote in what could have been a description of a Trump rally. They are public expressions of pain and a fervent longing for revenge, the lurid and detailed sagas behind each bout, rather than the wrestling matches themselves, are what drive crowds to a frenzy. These ritualized battles give those packed in the arenas a temporary, heady release from mundane lives. The burden of real problems is transformed into fodder for a high-energy pantomime. It is not going to get better. The tools to shut down dissent have been cemented into place. Our democracy cratered years ago. All Trump has to do to establish a naked police state is flip a switch, and he will. The worse reality becomes, the less a beleaguered population wants to hear about it. I wrote at the conclusion of Empire of Illusion, and the more it distracts itself with squalid pseudo-events of celebrity breakdowns, gossip, and trivia. These are the debauched revels of a dying civilization. The system is not reformable. Either we obstruct in the only form left to us, which is mass mobilization, acts of sustained civil disobedience, especially the strike, or we are frog-marched into serfdom. To be innocent now in the eyes of the state is to be guilty. It is to be complicit in this radical evil. It is to bear the mark of Cain. It is to do nothing, to defend the weak, the oppressed, the poor, and those who suffer, and to protect the planet. Choose, but choose fast. Time is running out. The sick, unable to afford care, are dying. The poor, especially children, are going hungry. Families, along with the mentally ill, are thrown into our streets. The unemployed and underemployed are desperate. Schools are being defunded and privatized. Our prisons are packed. The undocumented are being hunted down, imprisoned, and deported. Our roads, bridges, dams, levees, power grids, rail lines, subways, bus services are crumbling. The ecosystem is disintegrating as temperatures rise and freak weather patterns, wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, flooding, tornadoes, melting polar ice caps and glaciers drive desperate migrants northwards from the global south. This is the dystopia the ruling global class, the ruling capitalists, are shoving down our throats. No social or revolutionary movement succeeds without a core of people who will not betray their vision and their principles. In other words, like all of us here, militants. They are the building blocks of social change. They are our only hope for a viable socialism. They are willing to spend their lives as political outcasts. They are willing to endure repression. They refuse to sell out the oppressed and the poor. They know that you stand with all of the oppressed, those in our prisons and marginal communities, the poor, unemployed workers, our LGBTQ community, undocumented workers, the mentally ill, and the Palestinians. Or you stand with none of the oppressed. They know that when you fight for the oppressed, you get treated like the oppressed. And liberals plead with us to believe in the ultimate goodness of the ruling class, the fantasy that justice and social equality can be achieved through their bankrupt institutions, including the Democratic Party, even though, like Herod of old, they repeatedly sell us out. We are castigated for our anger, our alienation from the centers of power, and our bleakness. We are told to adopt a positive attitude, to trust the system, that we can awaken the dead consciences of the atrophied souls, the plutocrats running Amazon, Halliburton, Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil, and Citibank, and the two ruling parties. I cannot count how many times I have been told this. But this is the road to despair, not hope. Hope comes when we physically defy those in power. Those who succumb to apathy or complicity are enemies of hope, and they become in their passivity agents of injustice. Hope has a cost. Hope is not comfortable or easy. Hope requires personal risk. Hope does not come with the right attitude. Hope is not about peace of mind. Hope is action. Hope is doing something. The more futile, the more useless, the more irrelevant and incomprehensible an act of rebellion is, the vaster and more potent hope becomes. Hope never makes sense. Hope is absurd. Hope knows that an injustice visited on our neighbor is an injustice visited on us all. Hope posits that people are drawn to the good by the good. And this is the secret of hope's power. It is why it can never finally be defeated. Hope demands for others what we demand for ourselves. Hope does not separate us from them. Hope sees in our neighbor, even our enemy, our own face. And the powerful do not understand hope. Hope is not part of their vocabulary. They speak in the cold, dead words of national security, global markets, electoral strategy, staying on message, image, and profits. powerful protect their own. They divide the world into the damned and the blessed, the patriots and the traitors, the rich and the poor. They insist that extinguishing lives in foreign wars or in our prison complexes is a form of human progress. They cannot see that the suffering of a child in Gaza or a child in the blighted pockets of Washington, D.C. diminishes and impoverishes us all. They are deaf, dumb, and blind to hope. Those addicted to power, consumed by self-exaltation, cannot decipher the words of hope any more than most of us can decipher hieroglyphics. Hope to Wall Street bankers and politicians, to the masters of war and commerce, is not practical, it is gibberish, it means nothing. I cannot promise you it will be easy. I cannot assure you that tens of thousands will join us. I cannot pretend that going to jail is pleasant. I cannot say that anyone in Congress, anyone in the boardrooms of the corporations that cannibalize our nation, anyone in the press will be moved to pity, to act for the common good. I cannot tell you these wars will end or the hungry will be fed. I cannot say that justice will roll down like a mighty wave and restore our nation to sanity. But I can say this: if we resist and carry out acts, no matter how small, of open defiance, hope will not be extinguished. Hope cannot be sustained if it cannot be seen. Any act of rebellion, any physical defiance of those who make war, of those who perpetuate corporate greed and are responsible for state crimes, anything that seeks to draw the good to the good, nourishes our souls and holds out the possibility that we can touch and transform the souls of others. Hope affirms that which we must affirm, and every act that imparts hope is a victory in itself. I saw the power of hope in the mass movements in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Romania that brought down these regimes. These uprisings were spontaneous outbursts by an enraged population that had had enough of repression, mismanagement, and corruption. No one from the dissidents themselves to the ruling communist parties anticipated these revolts. They erupted, as all revolutions do, from tinder that have been waiting years for a spark. That this tinder exists in American society is undeniable, although to date its primary expression has been fascistic. These revolutions were led by a handful of dissidents who until the fall of 1989 were marginalized and dismissed by the state as inconsequential. The state periodically sent state security to harass them. It often ignored them. I am not even sure you could call these dissidents an opposition. They were profoundly isolated within their own societies. The state media denied them a voice. They had no legal status and were locked out of the political system. They were blacklisted. They struggled to make a living. But when the breaking point in Eastern Europe came, when the ruling communist ideology lost all credibility, there was no question in the minds of the public about whom they could trust. The demonstrators that poured into the streets of East Berlin and Prague were aware of who would sell them out and who would not. They trusted those such as Václav Havel, who had dedicated their lives to fighting for an open society. Those who had been willing to be condemned as non-persons and go to jail for their defiance. And no matter how tempting it was to give up, to make compromises with power, they did not. Julian Benda reminds us that we can serve two sets of principles: privilege and power, or justice and truth. The more we make compromises with those who serve privilege and power, the more we diminish the capacity for justice and truth. Our strength comes from our steadfastness to justice and truth, a steadfastness that accepts that the corporate forces arrayed against us may crush us, but that the more we make compromises with those who serve privilege and power, the more we diminish our own strength. Karl Popper in The Open Society and Its Enemies writes that the question is not how do you get good people to rule. Popper says this is the wrong question. Most people attracted to power, he writes, have rarely been above average, either morally or intellectually, and often below it. The question is how do we build mass movements to hold the powerful to account even when those in power come from our own ranks? There is a moment in Henry Kissinger's memoirs, do not buy the book, when Nixon and Kissinger are looking out at tens of thousands of anti-war protesters who have surrounded the White House. Nixon had placed empty city buses in front of the White House to keep the protesters back. He worried out loud that the crowd would break through the barricades and get him and Kissinger. And that is exactly where we want people in power to be. This is why, although he was not a liberal, Nixon was our last liberal president. He was scared of movements. And if we cannot make the elites scared of us, we fail. This is our calling. Our failure to immediately build a counterweight to the Democratic Party after it abandoned the working class with the passage of the North American Free Trade Agreement in 1994 was our gravest mistake. And this mistake was compounded by allowing liberals to herd us repeatedly into the embrace of the Democratic Party, promising it could be changed from within, that the corporate indentured party leadership would ever permit Bernie Sanders to be the nominee, or the stated goals of his platform to be embraced is delusional. Alex de Tocqueville correctly saw that when citizens can no longer participate in a meaningful way in political life, political populism is replaced by a cultural populism of sameness, resentment, and mindless patriotism, and by a form of anti-politics he calls democratic despotism. Only 11.3% of workers in this country belong to unions. This is the lowest percentage in 80 years. And nearly all these unions, and especially the AFL-CIO, have been emasculated by corporate power. We are not going to be assisted in our revolt by established unions. Union leaders such as the Teamster Sean O'Brien are bought off, they are comfortable, they are pulling down at least 5 times what rank and file workers make. They have sold out to the Democratic Party, or in the case of O'Brien, to Trump. We forget, as Alexander Herzen said, that we are not the doctors. We are the disease. We have to mount protests not only outside the doors of Walmart and Amazon, not only outside congressional offices, but outside the doors of union headquarters. There is no established institution we can trust. They are broken. But there are 30 million working poor, victims of mass layoffs, trapped in debt peonage, manipulated and used by the political elite, willing to rise up if we stop our virtue signaling and woke purity tests and speak to them in the language of class warfare. And this is why I support Workers' Strike Back. But let us be clear-eyed about what lies ahead. The enemies of freedom throughout history have always charged its defenders with subversion. The enemies of freedom have always convinced segments of a captive population to parrot back cliches to justify their rule and serve as goons and vigilantes in the name of patriotism. Those who created our mafia economy inevitably created our mafia state. And we must organize and organize fast to break our chains, one by one, to use the power of the strike to cripple the state machinery. We must embrace a militant radicalism, one that offers a new vision and a new social structure. We must hold fast to moral imperatives. We must forgive mortgage and student debt, institute universal health care, and break up monopolies. We must raise the minimum wage and end the squandering of hundreds of billions of dollars to sustain the empire and the war industry. We must establish a nationwide jobs program to rebuild the country's collapsing infrastructure. We must take into public ownership the banks, the pharmaceutical corporations, military contractors, and transportation, and end the extraction of fossil fuel. And we must end the genocide in Gaza, and that means the boycott, sanction, and divestment of the apartheid state of Israel. None of this will happen until we organize and refuse to walk away from our commitment to justice and to socialism. As the country disintegrates, as feelings of betrayal and abandonment mount, the ruling class will use their organs of propaganda, including the media, to blame us. Those in open defiance of authority for the chaos. The mafia state will be brutal. Capitalists, as Eduardo Galeano writes, view communal cultures as enemy cultures. The billionaire class will do to us what it did to the radicals who rose up to form militant unions in the past. We had the bloodiest labor wars in the industrialized world. Hundreds of American workers were killed. Tens of thousands were beaten, wounded, jailed, and blacklisted. Unions were infiltrated, shut down, and outlawed. We cannot be naive. It will be difficult, costly, and painful, but this confrontation is our only hope. Otherwise, we and the planet that sustains us are doomed. And I concede, we may not succeed. So be it. At least those who come after us, and I speak as a father, will say we tried. The corporate forces that have us in their death grip will destroy the lives of my children. They will destroy the lives of your children. They will destroy the ecosystem that makes life possible, and we owe it to those who come after us not to be complicit in this evil. We owe it to them to refuse to be good Germans. This is a battle, quite literally, between freedom and slavery, between life and death. It is that grave. And it is a battle that no matter the odds, we must fight. But in the end, I do not fight fascists because I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. Thank you.
Hedges is always great. That was great. Great speech. As to be expected.
The fact that Chris Hedges is here from across the nation at this organizing conference reveals that he's one of those all too rare leaders who wants to fight for working people, who uses his fame to stand with working and poor people and against war. Chris Hedges was the only public figure who supported socialists when Kshama first ran for city council here in Seattle in 2013. In fact, we didn't even have to knock on his door. It was Chris who reached out to Kshama and said, "I want to support your campaign." Chris Hedges has joined Worker Strike Back because he understands how important building our movement is, and I urge all of you to join Worker Strike Back if you haven't already. I also wanted to announce that we are now officially over 6.5 thousand people watching alongside us on live stream. And again, I urge you, if you haven't shared what exciting event you're at with your network, to send that link out and say you can watch alongside me. so
Yeah,
we can
definitely.
continue
Share
to
this
build that
stream,
number into
everybody.
the tens of
Share the
thousands.
stream out.
So our next speaker, it's my great honor to introduce. She's a longtime Green Party member, and she has run unambiguously pro-worker, anti-war presidential campaigns, especially last year against both Trump and Harris. She stood strong against years of slander by corporate media, by Democratic Party hacks. They're constantly wondering, where is Jill Stein? Well, I am excited to tell all of you here today that she's here to speak to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you all so very much. It is really a joy to be here. It is a joy to hear what everyone is saying. And it is a joy to be a part of this movement. I come here a little bit under the weather, as some of you may know, having had a bad case of the flu a couple weeks ago and then some asthma triggered by that flu. And I almost didn't come, feeling like there was no way I could actually prepare for this amazing summit. But at the end, I decided I needed to come just to be here, just to bear witness, just because this is what democracy looks like. And this is how we fight back. And if we come away from today with nothing more than the commitment to stay together, to be together, to know that what we did in the last election was not just okay, it was absolutely essential. It was world-saving. It is the way forward. This is what we must do. And the fact that they continue to blame us and to try to, to smear us for having challenged empire and oligarchy and genocide, the fact that they will not let up is absolutely the affirmation of our lasting impact and the fact that we must keep up this fight. In our minds, it's really important to invert the smears when they come at you. It should be an affirmation. It should be seen as a badge of honor. It should be seen as a confirmation that what we do absolutely matters. So I say, bring it on. Keep those smears coming. Keep us relevant. So we are very much here, and I want to thank everyone here virtually and in the room who's here to take back power from the billionaires and their two parties that serve them, and to put power into the hands of working people. So we continue the momentum of our pro-worker, anti-war, anti-genocide, climate emergency to demand an America and a world that works for working people, which is the only world that works for all of us. And it's important to know that that world in many ways is closer than it has ever been, because empire and oligarchy are indeed unraveling right now before our very eyes. They are collapsing in front of us. Empire is falling, we are rising, and this is unstoppable. So it's really critical, above all, to reject the propaganda that tells us that we are powerless, that resistance is futile. So many of us right now, you know, a recent poll, even before the shit started hitting the fan, something like 72% of Americans were tuning out of politics in the wake of the last election, the 24 election. 72%, according to polls, are tuning out because politics has become so toxic, so distasteful. And that is true, but it cannot stop there. We have to seize the moment. This is that perfect storm for speaking to the vast majority of Americans right now who are in revolt. They've just been denied a framework in which to unite that revolt. And that is what we are doing here today and with this Workers' Strike Back movement. So I encourage everyone to become a part of it if you are not already. Their resistance, their continuing smears against us, tells us that they, in fact, are terrified. They are terrified because they know that their days are numbered and they know that we are getting together. That is why they pulled out all the stops during our campaign. Their army of lawyers, their infiltrators and spies, which they publicly advertised for, their delay in our public funding, which kept us off the ballot in several states because we were not able to pay the costs of getting on the ballot where those deadlines were missed. The fact that they created a war room of constant lies and smears to disparage and suppress our campaign. That war room cost more than the entire cost of our whole campaign. So that tells you, what the terms were. They were terrified. Over 1/3 of eligible voters are not voting because they reject these toxic candidates and political parties being rammed down our throats. And who are those 1 out of every 3, more than 1 out of every 3 eligible voters who don't vote? They are largely people of color, low income, and youth. Exactly the people who benefit from the agenda that we propose. So this is a meltdown of empire, a meltdown of duopoly, and it is on the verge of that transformation to a people-powered politics. This is the American public, where, where 68% of Americans, last they asked, wanted an immediate ceasefire and an end to the genocide, where over 60% want a shutdown of all military aid to Israel. This is astounding. This is not so much a problem of a misinformed public. This is a problem of a public which is denied representation. We have an anti-democratic government, is what we have, both political parties. And as said earlier, Trump is a symptom. He is not the disease itself. He is part of the disease, but he is not the driver of that disease. He is a symptom of it. That disease is wreaking havoc on every dimension of our lives. It was, some months ago, it was said to be over 60% of Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. Well, now that is over 2/3. It's now over 66% of Americans. Over half of Americans are now struggling to pay their rent, paying more than 30 or even 50% of their monthly income just to keep a roof over their heads. Meanwhile, the rate of homelessness is absolutely unprecedented. Last year, the number of homeless increased by 18% in 1 year alone. That's on top of a 12% increase the year before. 100 million people are strapped in medical debt, 44 million in student debt. Half of youth say that they are hopeless about the future. 1 in 4 have considered harming themselves within 2 weeks of the poll alone because of how desperate they are about the condition of their lives. This says really more than anything that what is being imposed on us by the parties of oligarchy, by the corporate duopoly, is absolutely unsustainable, unforgivable, and it will not stand. Do not be fooled for a minute. You know, we've all been kind of knocked off of our feet by this incredibly rapid assault, one thing after another. We're not sure how critical each attack is. Where are we to turn our attention before we've observed, before we have even come to terms with the last hit? There are 5 more the next day. So this is really designed to keep us on our back feet, to keep us basically falling over. But in fact, do not be fooled into thinking that there is support for the oligarch agenda. Elon Musk himself, who people initially were favorable towards, even within the Republican Party now, he has become an absolute anathema. And there's overwhelming disapproval of Elon Musk and of his having any influence whatsoever in our government. The same is true for Trump's other policies. There was support. It wasn't overwhelming, but there was support across the board. Now that has pretty much gone, except on the issue of deportations, where the Democrats shared with the Republicans this pack of lies that really persuaded the American people shamefully into thinking that immigrants are the cause of greater crime, are the cause of the drugs coming into this country. It's actually the opposite. Immigrants are far safer, are far more community, family, and job oriented. Immigrants are not the problem. The problem is the US policies that have created wave after wave of migration. And that is where the migration crisis must be solved. The most critical thing we can do to solve the migration crisis is to simply stop causing it in the first place through endless wars, regime change, through economic sanctions that are driving people here in desperation. And you'll notice that while Trump did not talk whatsoever, not in his inauguration and not since, has not talked about the real crises facing American people, of homelessness, of the lack of health care, of the skyrocketing cost of housing, of debt. While Trump hasn't talked about it, the Democrats don't talk about it either. And Kamala Harris, in her campaign, had absolutely no solutions to offer. And when she was asked, you know, what was she going to do? Well, she was basically going to do more of Joe Biden, except that she would be different by appointing a Republican to her cabinet. That's how she was going to distinguish herself. Donald Trump, you know, has been overwhelmingly funded by billionaires. And the statistic to drive that home is the fact that 44% of the money supporting Trump's campaign came from 10 people. Donald Trump represents 10 people and a few others. That is what this is about. This is about a massive propaganda campaign. This is about manufactured consent. Do not believe for a minute that the American public is being fooled. And I will say that the latest polls showed that there is no longer majority support. Initially, it was, you know, modest support across the board for all of what Trump was doing. Now he has basically lost that support and he is in the negative. He's actually in the disapproval rating now on everything except for deportation, where there is still, you know, a lot of lasting confusion after years of bipartisan propaganda. But on all the other issues, on tariffs, on on the taxes and so on. There is no longer support on Elon Musk. There is no longer support for the Trump agenda. And in fact, he is running in the negatives now. He had the worst average approval, the worst average polling of all presidents since the Second World War. There is not support. And the second worst was, you know who? It was Joe Biden, which tells you that both of these parties are not representing us. They are not representing the American people who are hungry, who are desperate for change. A couple more quick mentions. There's so much outrage right now about the proposed Trump cuts, particularly to Medicaid and to food stamps, to SNAP. But actually the cuts that he is proposing are smaller than the cuts that were made by Joe Biden during his presidency. Shame. It was 24 million people who were thrown off of Medicaid by Joe Biden. And it was approximately 4.5 million people were thrown back into poverty after Joe Biden's cuts to SNAP. And further, Joe Biden ended the pause on student debt payments, which impoverished millions of people and continue to impoverish millions of people. There was no need for him to do that. He did that purely on his own voluntary basis to throw American youth and Americans of all ages, actually, back into student debt poverty. So shame on all of them. And same agendas exactly. And another fascinating statistic came out just the other day, that the Democratic Party now has the lowest public approval ranking since the question has ever been asked. They now stand at approximately 31% and massive disapproval. So this is, above all, do not let this emergency be hijacked, because that is what they are trying to do right now. That is what Bernie Sanders is doing. That is what AOC is doing. That's what all of them are doing, is saying, see, look how bad Trump is, put us back in power. But what exactly are they doing? What they're doing, I think, is best summarized by Hakeem Jeffries, if you saw the clip of him that went viral, asking, well, what is it we can do? I'm trying to figure out what we can do. It's their government. That is the problem. It's not their government, it's our government. And we need to throw all the bums out. So, to respond to Hakeem Jeffries about what can we do, let's see, actually, all right, let me just jump back for a minute. This slide really tells you what the driver is here. You know, the American public is tired. Working people are tired. They're tired of being thrown under the bus. They've been thrown under the bus for decades. And the Democrats showed us where they stood back in, what was it, in the 1990s with the passage of NAFTA, then again with the Wall Street bailouts, where Wall Street was bailed out to the tune of trillions, while millions, some 8, 9, 10 million American families were thrown out of their homes. Then you also had, you know, the Clinton crime bill and all that. So after a while, people gave up on the Democrats. In this latest election, some were fooled into turning to the Republicans, thinking that, well, maybe Donald Trump was going to do it. But they are rapidly waking up to the fact that, no, he is still throwing people even faster, or at least as fast, let's put it that way, under the bus. So this is very alarming to the Democrats, and I think that's why they are coming out again now, reinvigorating their smear campaign against us, because they know that people are hungry. And we came out of the election as the #1 people-powered alternative to challenge the parties of Warren Wall Street. And while we must, we must fight at the level of our communities. We must fight at the level of social movements. We must fight for a $25 an hour minimum wage, for Medicare for all, for social housing and the right to housing and an end to student debt. But we must also challenge power. And I agree, we don't want to predominantly focus on running a gazillion elections, but challenging power strategically and in flagship campaigns is an absolutely critical part of continuing to build our power. So I do want to encourage people to strategically fight. We are still here. I encourage you, if you're not already part of a Green Party chapter or a Socialist Party chapter, please join one and be a part of this fight. We do have a Green Party table here today. I hope you'll visit it downstairs afterwards. But this is really the driver here, where you are looking at basically, if you see the tiny red line on the bottom, that is the bottom 90%. That's the income level of most people. And it hasn't budged. It hasn't budged over decades, and that chart runs from 1960 to 2012. So you can be sure it looks even worse than that now, because billionaires and the super wealthy have doubled and tripled their wealth starting in the COVID pandemic, and that has continued. And the steep green swath at the top, which is spiking up and keeps going inevitably upward, that is the top. That is the income of the 0.01%. That is 1/100th of 1% has a massive amount of the income. So this is the driver here. As Louis Brandeis, a Supreme Court justice back in the day when they had some integrity, his famous saying was, we have a choice between vast concentrations of wealth or democracy. We can't have both. But this country has very clearly thrown its weight behind the vast concentrations of wealth. If you compare us to other countries around the world, I don't know if we are number one, but we are very, very close to the top. People often talk about Mexico as being, corrupt, as being a third world type, economic structure. To look at, they now have public financing of their elections. They also have an equal playing field in media. All media coverage has to be equalized. If you are running for their presidency, you cannot buy media coverage in Mexico. Let's take a lesson from Mexico. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is basically just another way to show, this shows wealth. The last one showed income, this shows wealth. That little orange line on the bottom, that's 50% of the population has 2% of the wealth. That's not very much. The top 1% is that bracketed area up there. 1% has 30% of the wealth, whereas half the population has to divide up 2%. So this is the driver. The rejection of the Democratic Party is not new. The rejection of the Republican Party is not new. What's new is that people are dropping out rather than vote for either of them. So this is really a perfect storm for change. And if you can go to the next slide, and this again, on that other issue about taxes, you'll see that quote on the bottom. Obama passed a larger tax cut than Trump's tax cut. Well, actually, Obama didn't pass it. He just made the Bush tax cuts permanent. So even on that issue of tax giveaways to the super wealthy, that is not just an issue of, of the Republicans. It's the Democrats as well. They are both 100% bought and paid for. And the next slide, you can go to the next one. That's just showing how money in politics is absolutely skyrocketing. It's off the charts. And the next one. All right, this here is the point I wanted to get to. This is that answer to Hakeem Jeffries. Be like the parliament of South Korea that turned out by the thousands within minutes. It was announced, martial law was announced in South Korea on December, I don't know what it was, 3rd or 4th, something like that, at like 10 p.m. at night. It was immediately live streamed and went out on social media. And within hours, there were 16,000 people there. to help the parliamentarians scale the closed fences that had been closed around Parliament, because they knew that they had to respond to this declaration of martial law. They had to respond quickly or the noose would tighten. Because along with this declaration of martial law was the prohibition against the meeting. Even the meeting of Parliament was disallowed. Press was disallowed. Labor actions were disallowed. Everything was disallowed. So they knew they had to shut it down. And that's what they did. Within hours, they had scaled the fences. The troops were actually helicoptered in to inside of the fences. They helicoptered troops in, but before they were able to do that, the South Korean people were there. They were there in huge numbers, and you can show the next slide. These are the staff who also scaled the walls, the parliament staffers who scaled walls, and they used couches to block the doors so that the troops could not get in. This is this was like a January 6th in reverse, with masses of people turning out. And you can show the next slide as well. Everyday people were there to talk to the soldiers. They were there to persuade them. And in fact, the soldiers then did a very slow walk, and they went out to get noodles before enforcing their orders. So, you know, again, it's to make the point that we do have the power in this country right now. We have an overwhelming opportunity. Do not be frightened. And, you know, as one of the people who ran into the struggle, along with Jason Call and others of our staff who were at Washington University when the students were striking, we had taken a moment to go take a bathroom break, and in that moment, the police were attacking. So we went running back to the lineup, and they were coming for us. They came for us, and these soldiers, these police who've now been trained by the IDF, the Israeli occupation forces, who are now in the business through the cop cities all around the country of training our local police forces, are being trained in the tactics of the Gaza genocide. Police are vicious. I mean, there are many people who've encountered police for a long time who know how vicious this is. So you do have to use some discretion about when you stand up and where you stand up, but we have to stand up. And one of the most important ways to stand up is by striking, is by withdrawing our labor, by supporting labor unions to do the same. And I want to also put in a plug for BDS, for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction, and Alameda County right now is among many counties who have withdrawn their retirement funds. Alameda County just pulled out $32 million from Caterpillar and its horrific destructive equipment. It is only a matter of time. Israel and its genocidal war and its genocidal economy is on its last legs. People are leaving. Its economy is in tatters. It cannot carry out even a war against Hamas. Hamas has reconstituted. Volunteers have replaced those who were killed, but the Israelis are struggling. They are capable of a 7-day war. They are not capable of a 7-month war, not even against one country. Now they are quickly expanding this concept of the greater Israel into Lebanon, into Syria, who knows, perhaps into Egypt as well. But there are conflicts now that are active and others that are brewing. Israel cannot possibly sustain this without our tax dollars and ultimately our blood. Israel is going to need boots on the ground, Under Democrats, we reactivated the draft. Our names, the names and addresses and emails of our young people are all in the hands of the security state right now. Let them try to reactivate the draft, and that will certainly be the match that kindles an incredible opposition, because the opposition is already there. Israel cannot conduct genocide without us, and we do not consent, and the traction for that is with our elected leadership. We need to throw these bums out. We need to organize. We need to prepare for the general strike, and we need to run them out of office. Thank you all so very much. I look forward to working together. Our work has only just begun. Thank you.
All right, I thought those were 3 very, very strong speeches so far. That was all great. They are going to come out and do their fundraising pitch.
Thank you
We'll watch
so
some
much
of that,
to
and then
Jill
we're going to bring
Stein.
in
It was an
our
absolute
post-duopoly
honor
brothers
to be on the ground with your
coming up soon.
campaign in Detroit, in Dearborn, talking to thousands of Muslims at mosques who desperately wanted an anti-war campaign in October of last year. And it was just... it terrifies me to think what would have happened if we didn't have a place to channel that energy to an anti-war, pro-worker campaign. So thank you so much again to Jill Stein for her bravery. Also, someone who joined us in Dearborn for several weeks to help campaign for Jill Stein, and I'm proud to introduce him to give a short appeal to help to ask all of you here to help build this movement, is Dustin Spence. He's a member of Worker Strike Back from Chicago, Illinois. Please give him a very warm welcome.